Welcome everyone to today's billing platform webinar. This is the next in our Elevate series of webinars. And today's topic is 5 things every CFO and controller should know about automating billing and revenue management. We're glad to have you here. My name is Matt Ream. I'm a director of product marketing here at Billing Platform, and I have experience in the past at Zora, at Leo Software, and at RecView, all in the similar space, and I'm glad to be here now at Billing Platform. I'm joined by Brad Sawaya, who is the CFO here at Billing Platform for nearly 5 years now. He is a CPA. He spent 3 years with EY in Palo Alto, focused on working with technology companies. And I'm glad to have you here, Brad.
Thanks, Matt. Happy to be here.
Just to review the learning objectives, we're going to talk about how purchasing software in the accounting and financial area has changed. And now it's less about CTO and more about the CFO and the controller. We're going to talk about 3 reasons why that shift is important for you to be aware of and how it can actually become a benefit to you in your job, in your department, and in your company. And then we're going to talk about 6 ways that you can measure success in making this shift. A lot of what we're seeing today, and you are probably seeing the same thing, is really a lot of change and evolution in that CFO role. How the CFO is responding to the changing needs of the business, to a difficult economy that we all agree we're facing this year. And so we're going to dig into just how that role is changing and what's changing it. And then we're going to talk about 3 particular areas that CFOs are focused on. And that's revenue growth, expense reduction, and how to really build that strategic and competitive advantage for your company. And then, as I said earlier, we're going to talk about how to measure success, which I think is a critical part of this. Just before I turn it over to Brad, I want to talk about a survey that we did with CFOs and controllers. And we had a dozen different things that CFOs are concerned about. And the question was about if they've seen changes in this particular area, how is that becoming less or more important to the CFO? And the top 5 answers of things that were becoming more important, these have always been important, but what we saw is really a change in how much more important they're becoming. And those top 5 were strategic business leadership, which I think Brad will talk about how that's becoming important. Overall financial management has always been, one of the number 1 aspects of a CFO's job. But the tech evaluation and purchase, we're going to talk about increasing importance. Finance automation and management of financial systems. Those last 3 kind of go together in my mind. What do you think about those results, Brad?
Yeah, I agree. I think that there has been a big evolution in the role of the CFO in the past, call it 10 to 20 years. And, there are certain things that have not changed. That's for sure, right? Like the CFO supports the CEO in running the business, and raising funds for the organization, and financing needs for the company, as well as going through audits and taxes. Those have all remained the same, and certainly elements within each of those tasks have changed over time, but the overarching need to accomplish various things has not changed. But with the cloud evolution, many things have changed. In fact, if you want to go to the next slide, Matt, the business strategy, that's something that has been relatively consistent. On the right side, leading finance, accounting, and departments, that's always been there, but the way we need to do it now has changed, and we're going to talk about that today. And then in the middle, the operations. I think you're seeing more and more, especially for software companies, a hybrid role of a CFO/COO, and that could be explaining the need for change there and the need for the CFO to be more involved in the operations of the business. But setting kind of even those things aside, the rise of the cloud companies in general and the way we operate our businesses in cloud environments has led to massive changes. There's the adage now that every company is a software company. And so despite what your end offering is, the way you go to market with that offering has dramatically changed. The emergence of product-led growth companies, and even just regular recurring revenue offerings, whether it's a SaaS company that's scaling or a traditional company introducing a recurring revenue stream. These all have led to changes in the way the CFO should think about things. Certainly there's been changes in revenue recognition and with ASC 606 and other things, and the need to pull essentially the customer experience all the way through down to the accounting. Whereas in the past, a lot of the accountant's role has been a back office operation. And now not only with the revenue recognition as well as operations of the business, it's becoming a differentiator. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. The one thing though that I'll call out right now is, contrasting the role of the CFO in relation to how the CTO's role has changed within companies. And if we rewind a ways back to where in the past, a CTO's role is also changed. And in the past, the CTO had a massive team, had a massive budget, specifically a massive CapEx budget, because they were managing on-premise servers that would then run the on-premise software for the companies, which would include the ERP. So oftentimes in the past, you had the CTO would lead evaluations or take a large part in deciding which elements, which software were going to be used within the company, and then implementing that software and running that software. So with the rise of the cloud infrastructure, just the nature of the CTO's role has dramatically changed in that their teams have shrunk, their budgets have generally shrunk. Oftentimes they've shifted. They still have a high degree of importance, no doubt about it, but shifted more towards supporting the actual product itself versus the back office operations of the business. And with that, the CFO is now put in a little different position where at the very least, they didn't have as much support as they maybe had in the past in making purchasing decisions and implementing softwares, but also in running that software and running the day-to-day. If I kind of think back to, relating to other groups as well, like the CMO or the CRO, sales leaders, I think a lot of this change happened as the CRM went to the cloud. And as the CRM went to the cloud, this seems so obvious now, but a lot of sales teams, they go out and they purchase their CRM and they run their CRM completely on their own. They don't need now, and it depends on each organization. Every organization is a little different. But to a large extent, they are capable of selecting their own software and running it on their own without the need of IT intervention. Same for the CMO. There's a million different marketing SaaS applications that are out there. And to a large degree, the marketing teams evaluate and decide those marketing softwares that they use and tools completely on their own. And I think the CFO and kind of the backbone of what we want to talk about today is the CFO is behind in being able to make those decisions. In many instances, again, due to the past where they've been able to kind of outsource that decision and consequences of that decision to the CTO to a large extent. But now the CFO, for a variety of reasons, needs to kind of be more front and center into that buying process and selecting the software. And this is something different. It's a shift in a mindset, and for those CFOs that are doing it, you can really get some strategic advantages out of that new mindset and that focus, and taking that full ownership of their own systems, which is not only the booking the debits and credits, but now has implications on the customer experience.
And that's a great introduction. While we bring up this first poll, we want you to go ahead and answer this. I've got a question for you. So let me introduce this first. We're interested in finding out who's responsible for purchasing and supporting specifically billing software in your organization. Okay, it's a financial software, obviously. Is that the CFO, like we've been talking about? Is it still the CTO in your company? Is it maybe a CRO, a Chief Revenue Officer, or is it someone else? And if so, let us know. So Brad, in talking about this shift, do you think that, I mean, I'm not a CFO, nor do I play one on TV, but do you think most CFOs today are prepared to take on that responsibility of purchasing and maintaining the software?
I think that's a good question. I think most are, right? Because at the end of the day, their teams have used the software. They know they actually, sounds funny, but they know what's best for their companies and how to use it.
So, right?
You'd hope so. But like I said, it's mostly a shift in the mindset, and I think it's taking more ownership up front in not only the purchasing, but then the implementation of the software. And as part of that evaluation, that's where I think there needs to be a little bit of catching up to do in how do you evaluate that software? How do you go out there and decide which one would work best for your company? And that's where oftentimes I think it's, in the past, it's like, oh, well, let's just ask the ERP consultant, or let's just ask the CRM admin. And, there's a lot of research that's really not all that hard to do, but that the accounting and finance teams can do on their own to validate their own assumptions and hypotheses around the area, and come to a decision. And that way they're the ones that are actually driving the decision through the organization, instead of reacting to what other people are suggesting that might not actually be the best thing for the company.
Yeah, great point. So let's get into the next section and talk about, what you think those main objectives are for CFOs and what they should be looking to accomplish.
Sure. So just on this first one, so I think we've outlined 3 different objectives here, that as a CFO and as the CFO's department takes more of a forward-leaning role in this kind of shift in the mindset that we're talking about today, there are some pretty big advantages that can come from that. We just high level outlined 3. There's certainly more than this, but the first one is growing revenue, decreasing, and the second one is decreasing expenses, and then the third one would be creating overall strategic and competitive advantages for your enterprise. So just to dive into this first one, Matt, if you want to go to that next slide again, to grow revenue. These things, again, are not new objectives for the CFO, but just perhaps a new way of going about them. So for growing revenue, going back to this shift that we're talking about, and specifically around companies and operationally speaking, how do you grow revenue? In the past world, you would have a situation where you create a widget, you sell the widget, and then you hand it over to the accounting departments, where they will send an invoice for that widget and then bill and collect. And there's very well defined start and stops in each one of those processes. Well, in today's world, that's no longer the case, where each one of those cycles becomes interconnected with the product itself. And that's definitely true for PLG or product-led growth companies, but even other companies as well, where there's a recurring revenue element. So whether that be gathering usage and data on how the customers are consuming the services or offerings that you have in the market, or other reasons in simply connecting to different milestones that are happening along the way. There's this connection with the back end systems that now needs to be funneled upstream to where growing, if we can set the ecosystem up in an agile way, it can have a material impact in growing your revenue. And just to give you an example, from in the past world, let's just say you have an offering where you would like to tweak it and change the pricing model or introduce kind of an add-on offering. Perhaps somebody has developed a custom solution for one of your big customers, and you now want to go offer that to the rest of your customer base. Well, kind of in the past world, what you'd have to do is you'd have to create a ticket to the ERP team. The ERP team would take the ticket, put it in the queue, and maybe 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 months later, you might have the changes you needed in the ERP simply to be able to bill for that new offering. That is not acceptable in today's world. You're in that world, you're getting behind in your ability to compete in the market. And so setting up an ecosystem to where you can, in a very agile way, make whatever changes you need to adjust to market conditions, whether that be adjusting a pricing situation or adding a new offering, or for other reasons, you're able to more closely map your offering to what the customer is going for and yielding a more positive customer experience, and therefore growing revenue faster. And that's what we all want. So, that's hopefully a positive way of saying that. The more negative way, Matt, is this last one here, and don't be a roadblock, right? So the CFO oftentimes is, pushing the product teams and holding the product teams accountable for delivering on the roadmap. But what we're seeing all too often these days is the product teams are moving as fast as they possibly can, but it's actually the delivery systems and even just how to run the transactions through the system, whether that be invoicing or generating usage data on our customers, or even knowing how to record your accounting entries, that are a roadblock and stifling innovation for these companies.
So, Brad, what do you think? Obviously we're going into what most people expect is going to be a difficult year economically. Any other tips? I mean, all these things on here still need to happen, right? But any other tips related to a potential difficult financial year that you want to add?
Yeah, this has been the primary focus for the past couple of years of growing revenue. Like, the valuation metrics and the multiples for companies, to a large extent, has been heavily weighted both in the public markets and in the private markets to revenue growth or ARR growth and growth rates. Almost to the point of grow at all costs, right? And as perhaps the macroeconomy starts to shift or change, in our next topic, we'll certainly talk about decreasing expenses. And so there will be perhaps more of a focus on efficiency metrics and where that growth, no matter what you do or how perfect you are at establishing your ecosystem, there could be expense considerations that you're looking to kind of be more focused on than maybe we have in the past year or two. But nonetheless, the revenue piece is another lever, that you want to be ready for. And, we certainly don't want to forget about that element either.
So our next one is expense reduction. And before we go to that, I want to show these results from our survey. This was, again, our survey to CFOs and controllers. And this question was about current top priorities. So we had people rank from 1 to 6 on their top priorities. And you can see the 6 here, but cost optimization wasn't just the number one. For everyone, it was far and away the number one. I mean, 68% of respondents put this as the number one priority for this year. And then, these others, data-driven decision-making was high, but even that was still about half as much as cost optimization. And these others didn't even make number one. There was a lot of number twos and threes. So I guess with that background, let's go into decreasing expenses.
Sure. And again, going back to our theme, cost optimization is nothing new, right? That's not a new objective for CFOs. And this is something that the CFO will partner with each one of the different heads of each other department and try to see what they can do to help them, and perhaps even give them certain objectives as needed. But just to focus a little bit more on the G&A expense line item here for a minute, and what that means, and what could be done there, as far as the shift in the mindset that we're talking about. And that is, oftentimes what we see is, as companies are looking to decrease expenses, there's opportunities there when you kind of go down to that second or third layer. These opportunities can come often in kind of one or two areas. And the first is manual or homegrown systems. So if you have, and this is super common, not only in fast growing software companies, but even in big Fortune 500 companies, where over time, as the company has tried to move fast, they have resided themselves to building out homegrown systems, and with a lot of manual duct tape and interventions on top. These homegrown systems, while perhaps on the surface might seem like they have been a good idea, or maybe not. Maybe everybody recognizes it was a bad idea, but due to the need to move faster, for whatever reason, they've ended up with them. They can really be a cost headache for the company. And even when you think about just having 3 or 4 or 5 more developers and a project manager on the business, to maintain these homegrown systems, it can be a significant drag. So that's one thing. As you're looking to evaluate how to decrease expenses over time, that's perhaps something to look into. There's been a lot of tools that have been developed over the years that perhaps 5 or 10 years ago, they were not available, and therefore the homegrown solution was the only way to go. But now there may be a better option out there that you can take and repurpose those developers into something that's more meaningful for the business. With homegrown, and even if it's this, no matter how homegrown it really is with software, just the manual intervention can obviously be a big drag as well, as companies are looking to, unfortunately, perhaps reduce headcount or repurpose headcount. The manual processes and carrying full-time people due to manual processes, that's obviously an expense that is worth looking into. And again, if you can automate, this is a relatively simple part of what we're trying to communicate today. And that is, if you can automate things, you can get those expenses down and get more efficient growth. And they're real. They're certainly real expenses, very specifically to our group and what we do as our product. There's been certain circumstances where you've been able to repurpose as many as 20 people into different departments where they don't have to do manual collections or manual billing. And certainly there are other functions out there where in bigger enterprises, they've kind of over time built up an army of people to do manual things when there's an opportunity now more so than ever to automate.
The automation has a lot of benefits. Definitely, with the efficiency and expense you talked about. I'm familiar with a couple companies, at least one that it was, they had a homegrown system like you were talking about, but there was one guy maintaining it, and every month, before they run billing, he has to do some maintenance work on this system. It came time for this guy to retire, and it was written in such an old language they had no one to turn to. They couldn't do anything. So it can even go beyond, you know, you know, giving you less efficiency or increasing your expense to making it actually so your business is not scalable or sustainable.
I totally agree with you, Matt. And that goes back to that first point that we were talking about and the efficiencies, right? I focused on the homegrown piece as far as decreasing expenses here, but obviously the homegrown systems oftentimes are a bottleneck. It seems like a good idea at first, and in those companies that are very engineering centric, it's really easy to hire engineers to build out these appendages over time, but they always get repurposed to other things, and therefore that system is kind of left dormant, which causes all kinds of other headaches, right? Especially when it comes to the ability to be agile or even be compliant with certain tax requirements or other legislative requirements.
Yeah, definitely. That brings us to a good time for poll number 2, since we're speaking about automation. But we'd just love to get your opinion on what the biggest benefits are. Again, since we're who we are, we want to learn about billing and revenue management. So what do you see as the biggest benefits to automating those particular systems? That may be decreasing costs, like we've talked about, increasing revenue, like the first topic, strategic and competitive advantage, like we're going to talk about next, or maybe something different. So please take a minute and fill that one out. All right, well, let's move on to how CFOs can help their companies obtain these strategic and competitive advantages. On that first bullet, I see, just to refer to that survey again, that data-driven decision-making was our second on the list of top priorities. So take us through this one, Brad.
Sure. Yeah. And again, going back to this theme of the CFO being more involved in the actual ecosystem, and not only their systems, the kind of the stereotypical G&A systems used to run the business, i.e. accounting systems, but these systems now need to become go upstream and become interconnected with the product itself. So whether you're a company that has a business and pricing model that is a usage-based pricing model, obviously you would need to go up and gather customer usage data in order to run your transactions, generate your invoices, run your revenue recognition cycles. But even in those companies that don't have that explicitly, maybe you're just charging flat rate subscriptions or something like that, having your customer data and insights into your customers' usage can be beneficial all across the board, right? It can help you better predict churn. It can help you understand the health of your customers, potential upgrade opportunities. I can't tell you how many times we're talking to other CFOs or other decision makers where they're frustrated because they don't have access to their customers' usage. So that's one element of having that data to make better decisions. Obviously, there's many other elements, access into your pipeline or many other things that can help and where data can help drive decisions. But that's one that we see more often than not and is extremely helpful and quite frankly, a big challenge. Increased speed to market. This is something that we've talked about already, and being agile with your ecosystem and being able to respond to customers' expectations. We're now seeing businesses have similar preferences to consumers and how they want to consume, purchase, and obtain the services and offerings that we bring to market. And if they aren't able to consume it in a way that they want to, they will go somewhere else, right? And it's not just a matter of having the best product, but being able to offer that product in a way that your customers want to consume it is important. Whether that be, acquiring a license and owning it forever, or whether that be subscribing to it, or only paying for what they use. You're seeing more and more of that. So setting up an agile ecosystem can certainly help in those areas. The other element that I thought would be worth bringing up is M&A prep. Depending on where the macroeconomy goes, we could see more consolidation in the market, and this goes both ways. Whether you're a company that's acquiring other companies, and if so, having an ecosystem built not only for your current problems, but if you're going to want to future-proof that system to where you're able for the different companies that you might acquire and bring into the fold and consolidate. Again, going back to those expense savings, and for other reasons as well, consolidate onto one system. And if you have a system that can handle different scenarios, that can be advantageous for you and your ability to go to market. As well as the other way, like if there's the potential that you may be acquired. This is where a CFO, sometimes that's a second step in the process consideration of, you go through the acquisition and then the integration is a second step. But it is extremely helpful if you can think through that now and set up your ecosystem to the point where if I need to migrate onto a different general ledger, how can I do that without impacting the customer experience, right? So if it's so embedded with custom code or with an on-prem ERP or something like that, that can become a huge challenge and a roadblock in a potential opportunity. If it's going to take 6 months to unwind that and wind something back up, well, either you're gonna have to stay on your own system for quite a long period of time and consume a lot of resources post acquisition. Whereas if it was set up properly from the start, there's situations where you can simply unplug from one general ledger or ERP and plug it into another general ledger or ERP with little or no disruption to the customer experience. And I think that's what we're going for, is to kind of have that foresight in mind. Those are kind of things that the CFO would have the best insight for. And so instead of kind of outsourcing those purchasing decisions to others, as we've maybe done in the past, having that in the forefront of our mind can bring these type of strategic advantages.
Great. I just want to go back to this one for a minute. We've talked in a little more depth about each of these. Just looking at the big picture, and like you said, there's obviously a ton of things that CFOs are responsible for, but within these three major areas, how would you, as a CFO yourself, recommend to other CFOs and controllers that they, kind of prioritize and balance the various tasks within each of these areas?
Yeah, I don't know that I particularly have a suggestion of to say, hey, one of these is more important than the others. That's all just going to depend on the business and what their current situation is. I would more so say just the overall kind of shift in the mindset and taking full ownership of those decisions. A couple of suggestions or tips and tricks that I might have would include, doing your own research. Peer groups are definitely helpful. Understanding how companies like yours are doing it. Analyst reports are super helpful. I'm always shocked to hear sometimes when accountants have made a decision. You're like, well, how did you come to that decision? And they hadn't ever looked at an analyst report, right? So, the Forresters, the Gartners, the IDCs or the MGIs of the world, right? Those are all super helpful making those decisions and doing that research.
Absolutely. I'm going to mention one of those in my wrap up. Let's move on to how we can measure success. So with all that CFOs are doing, CFOs like to have, tangible results, right? They like to see what's working, see what's not working, right? Everyone likes that, so you can prioritize and shift efforts and resources as needed. So Let's just talk about how you can measure success in these efforts.
Sure. Yes. We do like to measure success, right? We like to attach a number to things if at all possible. So here are just a couple of suggestions that I've seen in the past, as well as what we've seen our customers do, that could be helpful as you're thinking about, hey, what do I really want to accomplish, and how can I measure success of some of these decisions? Accuracy, that's an obvious one. For in our case, the invoices going out the door, are they complete and are they accurate? Or how many times do the customers kick it back for corrections that were an actual system problem and not something else, a misunderstanding? A control environment. We all know we need strong control environments, regardless of what industry we're in. And being able to maintain a strong control environment and having systems that can divvy up different roles and responsibilities in the ways that we need to in order to maintain SOX compliance is always something to keep top of mind and measure as you get through it, and kick things over to internal audit to not only kick the tires, but make sure they run all their walkthroughs and narratives in a way that can fully explain the end-to-end process. Go-to-market speed, we talked about that a lot today, and kind of grading yourself. Just an example that we saw not too long ago, where we had a big enterprise. Everyone would be familiar with the name. They wanted to introduce a new offering, and long story short, I can't go into details here, but long story short, they were able to go to market with this new offering within a matter of 6 to 8 weeks, whereas previous in the old ecosystem, it would have taken at least 6 months. So go-to-market speed, we talked a lot about that, and kind of giving yourself a grade on that. It could be helpful. And just a quick pause in the middle of these 6. Oftentimes this is not only how to measure success, but also how to convey the value to other departments, right? How to justify a change. I want to say justify an expense, but oftentimes this is actually expense savings. So that helps with the justification. But in addition to those expense saving justifications, justifying the change, call it right or wrong, but oftentimes change is difficult, and getting full buy-in to make a change, and to kind of go with whatever the finance and accounting department is suggesting. These are a couple of ideas to get others on board. But as far as measuring success, a return on investment or a total cost of ownership, that's obviously something that's helpful. You can put dollars to that. I would just continue to encourage the team, if there are manual and homegrown systems, don't neglect those expenses, because those can creep up and grow to material numbers. Integrations across various systems, how connectable is whatever it is that you're implementing. Can you do that in a way that works well? And then future-proofing the business. We talked about that within the M&A context, but even outside of that, as your business grows and scales or goes through potential challenges that you don't have now that might change the nature of how you go to market with things, keeping that in mind, and putting forth requirements that not only meet your current needs, but could also meet the needs outside of your current needs is one way to score the business, right? So if you have a list of 100 requirements, and you could say, well, 60 of these are for current pain points or needs we have now, but 40 of these are for things that we will likely need in the future, or our competitors need, or other companies like ours will often struggle with due to the research that you've done. That's also a good way to kind of keep a scorecard and measure whether what you're doing will survive the test of time.
Great. Let's go ahead and put up poll number 3. And this one is about those things that we just talked about. How do you measure success as a CFO or controller or finance leader within your own company in the automation of financial processes specifically? So those processes that you're most familiar with that run within your department, whether that's billing, invoicing, collections, revenue, whatever that may be. Is it accuracy? Is it control environment? Is it these other options? Brad, while they're doing that, I assume there's some of these are easier to measure out of a system than others, right? How would you rank these? What's easiest or hardest to measure? Get an actual metric on.
At the surface level, the ROI and the TCO should be one of the easier ones to measure. But the ingredients that go into the calculation oftentimes can be difficult, right? If you have a developer that is splitting their time between a homegrown system and something else, sometimes that's hard to come up with an estimate. I'd say future-proofing the business. I tried to kind of outline an example of what that might look like, but the reality is that that is probably not one that's as easy to put an objective measure on than some of the others.
Yeah, there's no number like, oh, we're at a 7 on future proofing.
That's right.
Accuracy should be pretty easy, right?
Yep, that one. Yep, just a matter of kind of keeping those notes and metrics and looking back on time.
Yeah. Okay. Just as a reminder, you can submit questions in the Ask a Question box. So we've had a few that have come in during the presentation that we'll go ahead and take. First one is, before we introduce new revenue streams, we want to make sure the old ones are optimized. How are you seeing CFOs playing a role in making that happen?
That's a good question, Matt. It's you kind of see it in a couple of different ways from what we see from our customers and potentially others. It can be a tough challenge. Say you're a company that's going through a digital transformation. You're going from selling software licenses to try to turn it into more of a subscription SaaS offering. And I what I would say is the biggest thing is protecting the customer. Everybody has a different approach to those types of transformations. Some like to just rip the Band-Aid off and force the changes through their customer base. Others will allow customers to continue to buy like they had previously and migrate over time. And you kind of still get a long tail of grandfathered customers that are still purchasing it in the one-time software license way. Revenue recognition rules come into play here. And if you're a public company, this can be challenging because then you're balancing, taking the initial hit for, say, a year or two or potentially longer, depending on the approach you're taking. And as a private company as well, it can be a shift in potentially the way that you're collecting cash or not. So CFOs certainly have a heavy hand and a heavy role to play in this approach. And what I would just call out is the customer experience is what's super important here, and mitigating those customers that are not happy about the shift. Perhaps those that are still in traditional industries where they still have that large CapEx budget and are used to acquiring and capitalizing those software expenses in software licenses they purchased and depreciating them over time, and how they expense that through the system. That is also an implication that they are concerned about. So staying close to your customers, as well as, especially if you have large strategic customers, and being involved in how they're accounting for this transition is something to keep in mind. And so oftentimes CFOs play a role in that communication and trying to help their customers be prepared and ready for the timing when they're going to make that shift in the purchasing methods of the software and migrating from licenses to subscriptions.
Great, thank you. Next question. What is controllership's involvement in pivoting to new business models, performing pricing experiments, etc.? How hands-on should they be?
Yeah, they should be super hands-on. And this is the classic situation. And we see this probably too often where controllership is kind of left behind, or even an afterthought, where maybe you have a product team that's leading the initiative of introducing a new product, or a sales team, or expanding into a new geography. And the better processes are where controllership is involved in the start, but oftentimes it's, for whatever reason, they're busy, or they don't want to get involved, or they're forgotten about, and then they're like, well, this has accounting implications, right? So we've talked about the CFO's involvement, which is obviously super important, and this happens too, where the CFO from a strategic standpoint is involved, but for whatever reason, it hasn't trickled through down to his or her team members. Having them involved is crucial, from even just regulation and a compliance perspective, and taxes, and understanding how that's going to be treated and being prepared for that, as well as, again, back to the ecosystem and making sure that you're able to generate invoices, you're able to transact, you're able to fulfill the transactions. If you have a new widget or a new software offering, you need to make sure you can monetize that, and all the way through cash collections, whether you're going to invoice and be okay with a delay in getting the cash, or whether it's a same time payment. All of those things have implications that controllership needs to be heavily involved in, and to a certain extent in a driver's seat in making certain decisions.
Right. Okay. Next question. Do you have any suggestions for the best ways that companies can identify revenue leakage?
Yeah, revenue leakage is a real thing. It's something that a lot of companies struggle with, in different challenges of different areas, and being able to identify where those revenue leakages are. Subscription renewals, that's a good one, where renewals are not happening, or there's a gap in the renewal, so that can definitely come into play. I'd say most often, though, is where you have perhaps a high growth company that hasn't gone through certain formalities or certain steps along the way, and essentially, due to their high growth, which is a good problem to have, you have certain custom contracts and certain custom elements that are put in place in customer agreements, and therefore they haven't captured those, and therefore they're undercharging their customers. Their customers are exceeding what usage entitlements they have, and looking back in hindsight, it can become incredibly challenging to identify what elements they're using versus what elements they have contracted for. So, suggestions that I would have include, if you can, try to limit that up front, and again, being ahead of the curve, being ready for that growth, having your ecosystem set up to capture each of those contract entitlements in a systematic way. That way, the controllership teams can see it and identify that in a way that's automated. And then the other is, going back to what we talked about earlier, is around usage data. Is if you can have that usage data, to marry that usage data up to those contract entitlements and identify if there are overages. And a lot of times, if there's only 2 or 3 metrics, that can be easier. But if there's 4 or 5, but you're only capturing 2 or 3 of the usage metrics, then those extra 1 or 2, those can be left behind, and therefore is a revenue leakage, and you're not capturing all of the revenue that you could potentially capture.
I saw a study just yesterday. Some revenue assurance organizations said that most companies can experience revenue leakage that adds up to 3 to 5% of their revenue, which is quite a large number, I think, if you look at some of these companies.
Sure. Yeah. And it's it kind of spans across the board, even going further to, a lot of companies are going through or wrapping up their financial audits for the prior year, if they're a calendar year end. And even from an auditor's perspective, right? Like you want to be able to capture each element of the audit, which in certain cases, usually the risk is, companies overstating the revenues, but there is also an element of potentially understating revenues for that very reason.
Mm-hmm. So that's all the time we have for questions. If we didn't get to your question, we will follow up with you later. I just want to wrap up with just a brief introduction on who Billing Platform is in case you're not familiar with us. We do have a cloud-based platform that lets you easily automate the entire quote to cash process. So from configuring your quote through billing and invoicing, payments, collections, revenue recognition, reporting, and then things like a customer portal so that customers can manage their own accounts. It's a very flexible, powerful system. We've had customers bring new products and services to market 30% faster and reduce operational spend by as much as 50%. So if you're interested in that, please check it out. I did mention this earlier, but as promised, I am legally obligated to mention that Billing Platform is the single leader in the most recent SaaS recurring billing solutions Forrester Wave. So that's cool. You can check that out on our website, learn more about the product on our website, billingplatform.com. If you do have any questions, you can contact me or Brad. And at this point, I want to thank Brad for joining us today. Thank you, Brad.
Thanks, Matt, for having me. It's a good topic.
Yeah, this was great. And this will be recorded. It'll be available on our website. I want to thank all of you who joined us today, and we'll see you on the next one.